There is so much evidence in the literature around the importance of social connection. There's so much about it in the workplace. There's so much about it that's important in our lives in general. And our previous Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, wrote an article a couple of years back, I think it was 2022, where he really talked about the compounding negative consequence of emotional loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And highly successful individuals are increasingly lonely. They're increasingly isolated. Their work is terrifically consuming, and there's not a lot of time or energy left over. And so when that's the case, there is not that ability to have meaningful connection and people who know you well enough to really see in your eyes that you're not okay and to check in on you. And then when you say you're fine, when they ask you how you are, and if they know
I feel like you're
otherwise,
calling me
that
out.
they know you well enough to be able to really sit you down and say, let's go to grab coffee. Let's
Absolutely.
go for a run.
Yeah.
How are you really?
Welcome to the Well-ish podcast, sponsored by Iowa Specialty Hospital, where real life meets better health. We're your hosts. I'm Derek.
I'm Anthony. Let's dive in.
Once again, welcome to the Well-ish podcast. We are so excited to be here today. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
I'm Anthony.
That's Anthony. We have had so many different kinds of people on our podcast here recently, which has been really fun, right? And I think today we get to once again step out of maybe our daily day-to-day and do something a little different. So, Anthony, I'll have you go ahead and introduce our guest.
All right, so today we have Laurie Baedke. And did I say Baedke correct?
Baedke.
Baedke.
Yeah.
All right,
Sleep in a bed, key for your car.
Laurie Baedke. Laurie is a leader coach.
Mm-hmm.
You also are a mentor. You're a mentor to me. You've been fantastic. And she's just an expert in everything that involves healthcare leadership. I'm going to let you elaborate on everything that you've done because there's too much for me to recall. But you are what I would consider one of the experts in healthcare leadership and healthcare coaching. So welcome in today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to get amongst it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess to that point, how about you kind of run through who Laurie Baedke is at this point in time?
Yeah. Well, man, I've had a little bit of an atypical career path. I think everything that you said is fairly accurate. I grew up in healthcare administration. So I started my career in healthcare leadership. I've always lived kind of on the ambulatory side of the house in the physician practice realm. I have a master's degree in healthcare administration. I'm, duly board certified as a fellow of both the American College of Healthcare Executives and the American College of Medical Practice Executives. And spent the first 8 to 10 years of my career in that realm, executive leadership roles, management consulting in traditional practice management environments. But about 8 or 10 years into my career, I realized that while I was, I think, good or reasonably good, maybe a little bit above average in executive leadership and operations management, what I found myself drawn toward or pulled toward was everything having to do with leadership development, everything having to do with growth and human performance and thriving and connection and mentorship and coaching. I became certified 20 years ago this year in 2006 by Gallup as a strengths performance coach. I was one of the first 5 individuals globally outside of Gallup to hold that certification at the time. And I then, a couple of years later, started endeavoring to speak professionally, and I've been speaking keynotes at conferences and in-house with organizations for about 17 years now. I've written 3 books on healthcare leadership. One is 2 editions of the book, The Emerging Healthcare Leader, a field guide, and then my most recent book was published 3 years ago this month, and it's titled Mentor, Coach, Lead to Peak Professional Performance, and it digs into the practices of mentorship and sponsorship and coaching and how they are influential in forming us and how we give of them to form others. And so that's kind of my career in a nutshell. I do a lot of speaking. I'm an executive coach. I am a fairly newly empty nester. I've got 2 kids, 20-somethings, and enjoying life immensely.
That's great.
Wow. That's awesome. I think that you can tell that you have a lot of fun doing what you're doing. And I kept, as you were going through all of those things, I kept saying, okay, what kind of question am I really going to come back to? And I kept saying, well, are you having fun? And I think that's the question I want to ask. Are you having fun with all of this?
I am having the best time, Derek. I love the work that I do, but I will tell you very candidly as well, like that comes at as the result of deeply courageous decisions, because any of those inflection points or pivots throughout my career came at the cost of kind of having other people look at me funny and go, "Why would you do that, Laurie? Why would I not continue to chase the C-suite of a healthcare organization because everyone that has the alphabet soup after their name that I have after my name, most of them live in the C-suite of healthcare organizations. That's kind of the holy grail. And so choosing to pivot and leave that and pursue leadership development, although in hindsight, people say, oh, you're a keynote speaker. Oh, you've published books. Oh, you're an executive coach. Great. But I mean, I'm pretty well established there now, but it's also like chasing that is a competitive thing to do. And then every time that, I had the privilege of having several amazing opportunities. Fun fact, I haven't applied for a job since the year 2000.
Hmm.
Wow.
I mean, the last 2 employment opportunities that I've had, someone called me up, a colleague called me up and said, "Hey, would you join my team? I need to undertake this, and you're the person to lead it for me. I need this built, and you're the person to do it for me." And those were really atypical decisions, but departing both of those decisions was also deeply, I left a C-suite role in an organization that I'd been invited to undertake, but it was actually outside of healthcare. And I knew if I'd stayed any longer, I was having the best time of my life. Such a fun opportunity, but it was outside of healthcare. And if I was going to stay, I would lose all of my credibility that I'd amassed. And so I had to make a really courageous choice. And then again, invited by the dean of the business school at Creighton to build an executive MBA program for healthcare professionals. And that was 10 years ago this month. Time of my life, dream job, had the best experience doing it. But I'm a builder, I'm not a maintainer. And so I built the program, but I also built a succession plan. And when my longtime associate program director completed his doctorate, and it was time for me to do what was planned all along, and that was to pass the baton and for him to fulfill that role and then go back out into entrepreneurship, a lot of people looked at me crossways and sideways because it's courageous, it's gutsy, it's absolutely terrifying at times, but it's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, Derek. And so it brings me a lot of joy and a lot of fulfillment, a lot of thriving, but it's not for the faint of heart.
It feels like you've really identified, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is kind of the divergence of job and career, right? And so it's like, while you've held these jobs, they've all been part of this underlying career that's kept moving along. And so while people might look at it, and it's a little bit different to think about the two as different things, right? When people look at it from that perspective of, what do you mean you're leaving this job? It's like, well, I'm not leaving my career. My career is continuing to grow and move along. And I think that's an like you are I feel like a very blatant example of how those two things, while they are moving along together, they're not the same thing.
They're not. And I think at the root of them, and Anthony will smile in a second because he's heard this from me time and again, one of the things that I just preach on incessantly is the root or the foundation or the core of what allows us to do that is deep self-awareness. And that comes through reflection. It comes through coaching and mentorship and sitting under the counsel of wise people, and then actually taking the time and having the courage to look deep inside yourself and figure out what makes you come alive. And then what, in fact, does not, what depletes you, or an environment where you can't experience thriving or flourishing. And because there is a place for everyone to thrive, but often kind of conventional wisdom and what comes to us might not be that perfect fit. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to really undertake that process and kind of sit in the tension of getting to know ourselves and then earning the fortitude or the conviction to make decisions based on what you learn. But then it's an iterative process because 24-year-old you might not think the same way as 38-year-old you and 42-year-old you and 51-year-old you. I mean, it's a living, breathing, organic process.
It's always evolving, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think too, everything you just said there, that foundation that you talked about allows you to make those courageous decisions. Like without that, you can't make that, at least feel, trust yourself to be able to make those decisions, right? And it makes it, hopefully, I'm assuming, easier when you did have to do that and pivot and transition. And similar to Derek, I find myself in that as well, like job versus career, and what are you doing, and all those fun things that you get to think about throughout your life. With that, I did not know about your Gallup
Mm.
accreditation,
Mhm.
because I took that with you, and I learned a lot about my strengths. I thought that was actually incredibly helpful for me as an individual. I'm curious, what are your strengths?
Ooh. Okay. So top 5: activator, focus, relator, achiever, and futuristic. So I'm a heat-seeking missile.
Yeah, you're boom, boom, boom,
And
boom.
a maverick and a bulldozer.
Yeah.
I'm a builder. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I took so I was an orientation leader way back in the day now at school in my
Oh, yeah?
undergrad.
Yep.
And so we took that strengths assessment. And I was also an RA, so I took a different kind of, I've done all kinds of those things. It's really interesting. And I'm very much, if the colors are still the same, I'm blue. I'm
Uh-huh.
blue everywhere. I'm an includer. I like, that's what I do. I'm bringing people together is always like, and so I feel like it's interesting because I feel like my achieve, and again, they could shift and change, I'm
Yep.
sure,
Yep.
as you grow, like you were just talking about.
Yeah.
But like, that's so interesting how different those can be, and yet here we all sit.
Hmm.
And Derek, you and I would possibly make a really amazing work partnership because includer is my dead last. Includer is my number 34. It is not natural for me. I love seeing like true includers because it is just so natural for you to want to throw the circle wider and see someone who doesn't look like they belong or and just kind of naturally invite them into a conversation and make sure they feel welcome and like they belong and belonging. There's so much, research around the importance of belonging in general and in the workplace especially as well. But it's not that I don't care about other people, but relator is my number 3. I'm a little bit introverted. I'm quite a bit introverted leaning. In fact, I'm kind of a homebody and I care deeply about one-on-one, rich, meaningful dialogue and discourse. But small talk and superficialities are the bane of my existence. And so if you even catch me at a cocktail reception, I, am going to be looking for someone I already know because I'd like to deepen that connection because making small talk with someone that I just met and, picking up on small details, that's just not for me. But the importance of includer can't be overstated. And so getting to know who you are and understanding then how to aim yourself toward the work that will be most rewarding, where you can achieve high performance and high engagement is very, very important. But also then understanding who's different from me, who brings diverse perspectives that can cover my blind spots and who might actually love to do the things that cause me to kind of wilt or procrastinate or be depleted. And so those are one of the important applications in the workplace or just in life in general of knowing who you are and who you aren't, and then finding other people, especially if you're ascending in leadership. The highest functioning CEOs are the ones who are willing to own and claim their sweet spots and also then acknowledge where they have deficits and then build an amazing team around them that covers those blind spots. And they don't, they're not toxic or arrogant in trying to defend who they're not because they're like, oh no, I'm not nearly as good at this as, this person on my team. And then letting that high tide rise all ships.
I just love listening to you talk. Um, So speaking of like building those teams, 'cause actually I can ask you a question about team building, but you kind of touched on that a little bit, and having those like multiple personalities in the room is kind of key to having a strong team, right? How does that look though for those maybe people that aren't in the C-suite, like the CEO that can build that team around them? Like, what does that look like when people, are emerging as leaders when they first get into the C-suites or whatever the case is.
Yeah. At every level of leadership, it's so important. And that level of awareness, I mean, if we're speaking to leaders or individuals that aspire to leadership, everyone should want or need to know what they're drawn toward, what they're good at, and be able to say, hey, I'm really great at fixing problems, right? Or I'm really great at building. And most of the assessments, I mean, yes, I am most familiar with Gallup's because I've been studying it and leveraging it for 2 decades now. But I tell people all the time, I'm assessment agnostic. And I really believe that all of them, as long as they're a validated, reliable instrument, are so, so helpful, because anything that you can do to put greater awareness in your mind and then in action to say, who am I? How do I build relationships? How do I make decisions? How do I solve problems? How is that like or different from the others around me? Now I can better make decisions around the type of path that I'm on. And I can help someone know, if they're interviewing me for a job, who I really am and what type of an environment I'm going to thrive in, and whether or not they want to extend me an offer of employment. And I can also then hopefully be assessing for them, are they the type of leader I'm going to thrive under, right? I personally am a very independent person, and I need a high level of autonomy. If I would be managed by someone who has micromanaging tendencies, that would be kind of the death knell for me. And it's not an indictment on their leadership style. Some people really want and need someone to be incredibly prescriptive, and they would thrive under someone who is that much more regimented and controlled in their leadership style, but not me. And so the more that we as individuals can get to know ourselves so that we show up and then both can say, hey, can I take a stab at that? Because, I've had a good outcome trying this before. Would you trust me, or could I contribute to that type of a project or a task force? And that's the type of young leader who, in an individual contributor role or in early leadership roles, can really start to advocate for themselves and communicate to say, I'm signaling where I can go. Would you trust me? Would you let me stretch here? And if either of you has a direct report that has shown strong performance and a lot of promise and came to you with that clarity and an ask, you're probably going to be far more inclined to give them a stretch assignment or include them on a team that's doing something unique and let them kind of, test drive things in a, training wheels on type of environment. And then as a leader, it should teach you as well to talk about the learnings that you have about yourself. I'm very relationally inclined, or I'm more highly analytical. I like the behind the scenes work. I like the front of, shop work, whatever you can do. Then that tells your employees, oh, maybe I should be thinking about that as well. Maybe I should be considering, who am I and what describes, the work that I love, and then helping to mentor and coach folks along. It's one of the most important and influential things that a leader can do, is to help others develop. And that is, where mentoring comes in. That's where coaching comes in. And one of the biggest headwinds that we have facing us in healthcare and just in our world at large right now is that the pace of change is overwhelming and chaotic. The amount of uncertainty and challenge is significant. And in healthcare, for example, I've never, in my 28 going on 29-year career, never seen the sheer volume of reporting structure that I see in frontline and mid-level leaders in healthcare right now. I was just speaking a couple of weeks ago with a mid-level nurse leader in a large academic system that I've been mentoring, and she has 168 direct reports. 168 direct reports. That is quite simply untenable. There is no realistic way, because their system's gone through multiple extractions and rifts of layers of management and administrative leadership, or she's a clinical leader, that's unsustainable. There's no way. If you look at any of the research that tells us what drives an employee at work and what they most want, they want to feel seen, they want timely feedback, they want to feel recognized and acknowledged, they want to know their leader so that they can take a problem to their leader and have that psychological safety. None of that exists. It's hard to sustain if you have 16 direct reports. You 10x that? No way. No way. So, yeah.
Yeah. That is really fascinating. How do you insert yourself in that situation? Because like obviously you are mentoring, it sounds like you're mentoring someone who's in the stack of people, they're in the middle.
Yep.
So how do you help them solve this problem?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's unique in every circumstance because, that is a stated reality. It wasn't the presenting problem, but it's something that requires then a high level of empathy. And my response is typically, to just ask more open-ended questions. How is that going? And what are your biggest challenges? And how are you achieving small wins that help you to feel effective and know that you are being effective as a leader to the individuals that you have? But then, kind of zooming out as well and at the broader scale or the macro level to say, okay, what environment do you feel like you would most thrive in? Because most leaders, especially mid-careerists, are really thinking about, here's where I've been and here's where I'm at, but kind of what's next. And all of our life experiences at every step along the way should be informing that. And I feel like one of my opportunities in any mentoring conversation is just to be a voice of counsel and to, ask good questions. Most of the time, um, people have the self-awareness within themselves or they have a gut instinct, and a lot of mentoring or coaching is about asking good questions that help someone to feel better connected with or get better clarity on their instinct to follow their instinct, right? It's a method of validation.
Absolutely. You probably don't remember this, but one of the first questions I asked you when you were presenting to a big group that we had was to that point of doesn't the research tell you that ideally a team that you can effectively lead is like 6 to 8, right? And I, I could not imagine doing 160 individuals, let alone 20 plus. So really quickly though, I don't want to touch on two things. First, we never really described who you mentor or like coaching, because I think you do with physicians and mid level and so let's talk about those different levels. And then secondly, how many individuals are you actually working with? Because I'm kind of curious after we talk about how you can effectively,
Yeah.
do that. So
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll start with the last question. I mean, at this season of my life where I am exclusively, this is my entire livelihood is speaking and coaching and working with organizations or teams around leadership development needs. And so my coaching practice at any point in time has between 8 and 10 individuals in one-on-one coaching relationships. Um, and, in prior chapters where I was, a full-time faculty member or over different seasons of my life where I, from a personal perspective, didn't have as much bandwidth, that number was 1 or 2 or 3. But it's 8 or 10 at this point in time of individuals who I have one-on-one coaching engagements with. It's always running about 60 to 70%, maybe two-thirds are physician leaders. I, you know, I, I have spent the entirety of my career basically working with physicians and surgeons and just have a strong affinity for them. I am, of course, not a physician or a surgeon, and so I can't coach them on their clinical craft, but I can be a great thought partner to them, I think, in helping to kind of understanding their training and the demands of their roles, but then to be a good thought partner for career advancement, for navigating the challenges of leadership, leading themselves, and then leading a team, because they're so highly trained and effective in their clinical discipline. But then the best of them often get asked to be the medical director or the, chief of staff or the chief of the section or the department chair or the dean or the chief medical officer. And then they're accountable for so many things that they've never trained on. It's leadership development, it's performance management, it is mentorship, or it's strategic planning, and it's the financial elements or the behavioral and human elements of leadership, of administrative leadership. And so the majority, I mean, like I said, 60 to 70% are clinicians or physician executives. And then I have, a good quantity of hospital CEOs or other individuals who are in advancing executive leadership roles in healthcare. Um, I have roots in small town. I grew up in a town of 600. I mean, I work with a lot of rural organizations, and I have a deep passion for rural healthcare. And it's present in every of the 50 states, right? I was just, speaking to a group of healthcare executives from every state in the union this morning, and that is the reality. If it's Texas or Alaska or Montana or Vermont or, Tennessee, every state has rural communities, and they also have larger communities. And so the needs that exist within any state are significant. But I have a strong affinity for rural healthcare because your health system serves a largely rural constituency. And for people to have a physician in the community, to have an emergency department present, to not have to drive 70 minutes to deliver a baby, or, to have somewhere to go if a bone is broken or a laceration occurs, right? These things matter. And right now we are seeing more and more rural facilities closing, and that access is, shrinking. And that's a huge challenge. But all of that to say, I have a deep affinity for leaders who lead in that type of an environment. So occasionally I get to work with individuals who are leading at the helm of rural critical access hospitals or FQHCs. And I have a strong amount of appreciation and respect for the individuals that commit themselves to that role, because it is a whole nother ball of wax to be, 45 minutes or more from the nearest target and perhaps several hours drive from an airport. And again, then workforce issues and leadership issues all compound.
Yeah. So you've uh, every kind of healthcare. There's so many, like you said, there's cities, rural, and then you name it, kind of disciplines that people are in. Like, what are some differences that you feel you see in the leadership styles? I mean, obviously each individual has a different kind of leadership style, but what are some things that you might see from healthcare type to healthcare type that leadership style needs to change?
I'm not deflecting your question, Derek, but I would say if I'm going to define what I think is the most effective and important leadership attribute to bring to give the best opportunity for an organization or its employees to thrive, it requires a deep amount of kind of passion and vision. But then that ability to cast that vision in a way that invites other individuals along. And it's very disheartening right now in healthcare to realize that everyone's needing to do more with less. And margins are razor thin in healthcare, and the headwinds have never been stronger. But there are decades of research that confirm and validate that healthcare professions, specifically clinicians, whether physicians, nurses, other clinical disciplines, pursue healthcare, and the significant amount of training and then requirement or tax that it takes, or the toll to perform at a high level in that career. And they are the most purpose filled and hardworking and most capable professions, right? And until recently, the COVID pandemic over these last 6 years has, of course, started to erode the, the respect that's upheld for healthcare professionals. And that's disheartening. Although, I mean, medicine is still noble, healthcare is still noble, nursing is still noble and highly regarded. But individuals who can cast a vision and then invite others along into that vision are doing so to an audience of some of the smartest and most capable and strongest individuals among our population. And so if we can shift our attention from the constant distraction of the tactical, the technical, the economic concerns, the regulatory constraints, and those are very legitimate and consuming and have to be attended to, but who can balance them with the human components and the behavioral, and really inviting someone, getting to know Anthony and inviting him to get to know himself so he knows where he can stretch himself and raise his hand and ask me for more. And Derek, the same thing, right? So for a leader who brings that ability to unlock the true capacity of the people in their organizations, not only will those individuals perform at a greater level, and they will most likely enjoy it and be connected to engagement, meaning, and purpose. And then they're so much more likely to be retained. And even though they'll probably get emails from recruiters inviting them to, consider a job here, or you could make 3 times this if you just did locums work, et cetera. If you've got a really healthy environment, a culture, an organizational sense of belonging, that connective tissue is perhaps, the best competitive advantage that an organization or their executive leader can bring to the table. And I think it's more effective to, instead of indicting, what doesn't work, let's just talk about and train for and chase what does work.
Yeah. I can feel the strengths in your description there. Did you feel all those too, where you were pulling? So it's like you've got someone building a vision, then you've got people pulling it, and it's like, it's like building that leadership team, or just being, and like you mentioned early on, like the courage it takes to basically ask someone to join a vision.
Yeah.
If you have one, like that's massive. And you see it in throughout history. And you mentioned the Founders podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a really great example of a whole bunch of examples, to use the word twice, that show us like, yes, starting the vision is one thing, but carrying it out is, it takes a village, right? There's a reason that saying exists, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's so fascinating to hear it, how you talk about it from both sides, the strengths, and then, okay, what's the number one thing that we could do? Well, use your strengths, right? Like,
yes. But I really want to caveat there, Derek, because I totally agree with everything that you just kind of restated. But I also want to speak to the person who says, well, Laurie, I'm not a charismatic communicator. I'm not a visionary. I am an integrator. I'm an operator. I'm very execution. I like the behind the scenes. I know and coach or work with a number of remarkably effective executives who are either tremendously passive and discerning and deliberative, or perhaps more introverted leaning, or they are deeply clinically entrenched or operationally effective, and they can still be terrifically effective CEOs or high-level senior executives. You don't have to be, I use the term golden retriever all the time. Like, I think of people with high woo, like the extroverts, they want to meet everyone, and they've got a great vision and they can tell a good story. But we've all met people who are like that, but they're completely, either superficial, or they can pour the Kool-Aid, but they can't build or operationalize anything. And that doesn't mean they're an ineffective leader, as long as they've got a really strong team around them that does that. But on the other hand, you don't have to be super gregarious or super extroverted or super charismatic to be an effective CEO, because you can be a terrifically effective CEO if you have a COO, or, if you have your team around you that complements who you are and what you bring to the table. So I do want to encourage someone who's listening who says, that just took me off the equation of being able to be an effective executive if I don't have this one archetype. And I love research from Adam Grant on how introverts succeed. I also love research from Susan Cain, her book, Quiet, and so many of Adam Grant's writings, and a lot of Adam's research around the sustainable efficacy of introverted, humble leaders can't be overstated. Don't sleep on a really powerful, humble leader in terms of their ability to be deeply effective and still very, very magnetic in attracting other people to want to work with and for them. You don't have to, there's no one archetype of an effective executive.
That Susan Cain book, Quiet, that was I think, a great book for anyone to read, whether or not you're an aspiring leader or not, just because it really, from speaking from my perspective, it had me actually question whether or not I was an introvert. And I can't remember if we talked about this, but the reason it did is because it talked about how so many introverts either get shut down. I'm paraphrasing a lot of this, but are kind of nervous about going into those roles where they see the extrovert and they feel like they have to be that extrovert. And one thing that you always talk about is really using your strengths. Obviously, Derek even caught on to that pretty quickly without you even having to say that, right? And the reason it made me think of whether or not I was an introvert is because I like my quiet time, but my strength is doing stuff. I'm also that activator. I'm also that, not necessarily, I don't think I had the visionary on my strengths, but doing things and being with people and talking. So I just wanted to build out that and say, yeah, Susan Cain's Quiet book is a wonderful book for, I think, everyone to read, especially if you think potentially you want to be a leader and you're worried because you're an introvert. With that, have you been following Brad Stolberg very much?
Um,
A
I
little
know who
bit?
he is, and I follow him a little bit, but I haven't seen him.
I feel like he's been doing just a lot of good work on, I want to say, your growth edge, his growth excellence, maybe. But anyway, talking about growth, and his big, more recent book, it's a couple years ago now, was talking about groundedness. And a lot of this stuff is really up to you, it's just about that self-reflection. How can you build the best foundation about, or best tools to grow that foundation of understanding yourself?
Um, that's a fantastic question. It's such an important one because we have to kind of like make the margin to invest in it because the time is never going to present itself. And I mean, the farther that you advance in your career, usually the more complex your job becomes. And most individuals, as they progress through the decades of their adult life, their life becomes more complex as they advance as well. Whether it's because they become married or start a family or invested in their community and their role is more demanding. Maybe they're involved professionally at regional or national levels in societies or academies. The time will never just fall in our laps for us to sit and reflect, right? And so that's why so often we think of, this meditative monk-like state or practice that's just unsustainable or unattainable. I think you have to just have this discipline of doing it, and consistency beats intensity. If you find 5 minutes a day for some type of a quiet reflection to look at your, an assessment that gives you an overview of who you are, what your strengths are, or, some type of a journaling practice that has you looking back at things that you're learning, or cordoning off time for relationships, individuals who hold you accountable, kind of a battle buddy or a mentor or a trusted colleague or a coach. But investing in that because it will never, I think almost everyone at every stage thinks, oh, well, I'll do that when, right? If I'm a individual contributor, new in my career, well, I'll do that when I'm a leader. But then all of a sudden, holy heck, now I'm a leader and I've got, 8 direct reports and I don't have time to myself. And then maybe I've, got littles at home that are waiting for me. And, it's, when do I have this time? You're never going to. And so it's just this discipline and practice of consistency, finding ways to do it. And I'm a big fan of multitasking. When can you find that? So, like, anytime I have drive time or airport time, I am constantly consuming podcasts or audiobooks. And, anytime that I can think of, can I combine movement with learning in some way, or movement with connection and conversation with someone that I really value or cherish? Those are the ways that you kind of get that win-win of how can I double dip? Because time is finite. And it's challenging regardless of who you are and in what season. Certain seasons are more demanding and consuming than others. And so how do you make sure that you're just consistently doing that? Once a month, are you in conversation with a mentor or a key prospective center of influence who is a networking contact that you should, what are you doing on a daily basis or at least a weekly basis to be considering reflection time to know who am I and what have I learned about myself and what would I do differently next week if this type of a conversation presents itself again? And then on a monthly or quarterly basis, how am I considering kind of longer term, zoom out career strategic planning or role performance assessment? Those are the things that it's never just going to come to you. You have to fight for that discipline of prioritizing, putting it into your life, because otherwise the days, the weeks, the months, the quarters, the years, they just, yeah.
So all those things that you just mentioned as like all these different practices, and I can see how they fit in your life now, right? But like thinking back, as obviously we've talked about how people evolve, like how did you start with those? What was kind of the first moment you remember of like, I made some intentional space to learn about myself?
Yeah. Man, that's a good question, Derek. I'm not sure that I can think of pinpointing a specific time. I mean, it's kind of consistently been something I've done, sometimes far more consistently than others, right? Different seasons of life have had, and I mean, if any of us think about like what a different role is, there have been times where I've had a commute very consistently, and even if it was a busy personal season of life, it was time that I was guaranteed to get either some quiet time for some podcasts or audiobooks, right? And so um uh, that's been something that's been pretty darn consistent throughout all of the years of my career, but undoubtedly, I mean, now, I mean, my life looks very different now as an empty nester than it did when I had littles or when I was in a season of life where travel sports was just nonstop. And I mean, we were just always on the go with a practice schedule or, out of town every weekend for competitions and who's on first. And I only had 2 kids. I mean, some overachievers in life, man, they're just, I
Four or
don't know.
five. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
6, 7. I
Oh
mean, yeah,
boy.
but s- so it's just something. I mean, here's the thing that I would say to any listener. If you're still young in your career, the compounding value, just like starting early in investing in your 401k or in a Roth or a backdoor Roth, is a huge advantage because you give money the power of time to compound, right? Game over. Same thing with practices like this early in your career. Do it before you think you need it. Build relationships, invest in your network, invest in yourself in the way that you can early on, because unless you've established that practice, later on life will become so busy and then you won't have that well to draw from of knowledge, of wisdom, of people that you can, call up when you need to pick someone's brain or when you need someone to talk you off the ledge or when you need someone to nudge you to jump, into a next chapter and you need a little bit of courage and someone to say, You got this, you're ready." So you do it before you're ready because you give anything the power of time. But I mean, if you're 40 or 50 or 60 and you haven't started yet, it's not too late, right? I mean, do now what your future version of yourself will be grateful that you did.
I love that. That's awesome. And I think it really, like, learning about yourself. I think my next question is, how do you communicate what you learn to other people to help build those teams, right? Because I mean, obviously people can infer like, hey, this is someone who's good at this kind of thing, but like but not everybody knows every side of me. So how do you go about communicating those to the people that you're trying to build professional relationships with?
So help me to understand. So
Like
how do
your
I,
strengths. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
so from a leader's perspective, not just me, how do I, but like, how does a leader do that?
I would say both yourself and then also how do you coach people to help communicate their strengths to others?
Yeah. I think, again, it's something that's so easily overlooked in organizations or teams because we are constantly, in this hamster wheel of meetings and processes and cycles and tactical operational demands that seem like they have to get done. But, so much research underscores the importance that human connection and that taking time to say, okay, oh, who do we have doing this process? Oh, they shouldn't be doing that front facing, people facing work. They should be doing this. And then we've got someone who's very highly relational doing something that's very, very operational or technical. Let's, and being more thoughtful or strategic in who is doing what and making time to invest in that self-awareness and the clarity such that you can then restructure, reinform, and you might not have an ideal circumstance, especially in smaller teams. Or, I mean, I see this especially in small organizations. I mean, the number of hats that individuals wear in smaller organizations, more lean startup type environments or smaller rural organizations compared to really complex bureaucratic academic medical centers or huge systems. Um, it requires that people are constantly multitasking or wearing different hats. But even still, you might say, well, this is the most ideal. I might not get that exposure this year, but a piece of advice that I consistently give in coaching conversations or teaching around this is if you can assess for making incremental progress toward doing a little bit more of the thing that you'd most love to get increasing exposure to, and then diminish your exposure over time to the things that drain you or deplete you or don't play to your strengths. I know no one at any level in any profession, no one have I ever met who has on their plate of responsibility 100% of the things that they just love and are perfectly playing to their strengths. Not even me, right? I mean, and I've cherry picked and built my life pretty well to this point in time that I'm not doing a lot of things that I dislike, but even still, I mean, I have things that I'm responsible for and do that might not be my favorite on stage, on screen, on mic moments, but they're important to the progress. And so if you can be aware of that such that you can either assess and audit, okay, compared to last year at this time, or compared to the last time I sat down with my leader for my annual performance evaluation, I've actually gotten this new task assignment and I got to do this project and I got to be a part of this. And that new team member came and he or she took over leadership of this piece that I used to have to do and it drained me. But because we've been talking about this as a team, now I've kind of started to diminish my obligation toward that. And my leader has also said that I'm his or her successor. And so I know they're being groomed for their leader's role. And within the next 2 years, I'm probably going to be moving up and I can see this progress. So it's that incremental, consistent change. But unless you take the time to consider and assess and take stock and then kind of document things and codify them and share them in conversation with others such that you can then come back to it again next quarter or next year or as a team when you're having huddles and saying, okay, are we getting more increasing adjacency and how's this going? And okay, well, Derek, you're still responsible for this. And I know you don't like it as much, but I can see you're procrastinating on it. And so I mean, I need you to continue to gut through because I don't see for the next 18 months that someone else is going to backfill this. So up to, right? And so those types of conversations, when we can have them, are so refreshing because both we can see progress and then we can also see, okay, I mean, this actually matters. It makes a difference in how I feel about my work and I can see how it's unlocking capacity or performance in other members of the team. And all of us, look, no one's left in the last couple of years. And now all of a sudden, people are talking about Anthony because he's such a rock star boss, right? And he's got this team that everybody wants to be on. And, you know, this is awesome, but it doesn't happen without intention.
Intention and a lot of work.
Intention.
I'm currently reading this book, Essentialism by Greg McKeown. I think it was in one of your your articles. Yeah.
Yeah. Love that book.
And I think that statement you made about how you can't do everything that you want to, there always is going to be stuff that you maybe don't favor or enjoy as much, is super important because and I feel like I gotta quit bringing up social media all the time, but that's what you see what everyone's doing. Like unless you made that statement and someone listens to this, they probably see what you're doing like, oh, she's doing everything that she wants, right? But there are things that are going to be, in the nitty gritty that are the dirty work that, no one really wants to do, but you have to do that stuff. But as long as you are using that intention, as long as you're doing that reflecting, you can get to a point where maybe you're doing a majority of what you want and not what you don't want.
Fills your bucket that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and it's an investment as well, because I would submit to you, and I think both of you probably know this and practice this as well, but so many of the things that we need to do, we don't necessarily want to do. Whether it's pursuing another, advanced degree or earning a credential or, investing in getting up and getting the type of movement that we know that we need to fulfill and sustain the health of our body, or nutritionally fueling ourselves and giving ourselves the time to connect with other people in a way that fuels our social well-being. I mean, so many of the things that we need to do aren't easy to do, or they're not comfortable in the moment, right? That deduction that comes out of a paycheck that goes into a 401k account that we're not going to withdraw upon for decades to come is painful at certain seasons of life, right? But we do it out of stewardship of what we're going to need in the future, right? We should be stewarding our sleep hygiene because we know it's what's going to unlock the highest cognitive performance on any given next day, right? Movement, strength, all of the things that we have to do, most of them don't come in ease or comfort. And being the type of person that then goes ahead and doubles down and, does that thing, commits to it, and is the type of person that says, I'm going to do that because I want to be the person that feels like and reaps the benefit of doing that. It is kind of the same when it comes down to some of those pieces of leadership that are never going to come easily. They're never going to be nearly as demanding as that monthly budget report that's due, or, any of the urgent things that are going to kind of pull us around by the ear on a day-to-day basis. But we have to do them because avoiding them, ignoring them is just, paying a tax on our future capacity or the performance and capacity of our team.
Yeah, investing, audits. I like to use those words all the time, and I think those are super important because it gives you the key to be able to open that safety deposit box later on. That's how I like to get to, right? If you aren't doing that now, how are you going to have that time later? And you've been talking about that this entire time. I do want to be mindful of your time. I know you have a speaking event later today. And this has been, I mean, I could go on for hours here. I actually wish that there wasn't anything holding your time because I would probably make this like a 3-hour podcast. Is there anything that you would just like to throw out there to either our listeners or that maybe we didn't get to, but you thought of as we've been talking?
Yeah. The one thing we alluded to it briefly at a couple of points, but I think cannot be overstated is the importance of building relationships and building your network. And I think it's another discipline of highly effective executives and professionals is that none of us gets any measure of success or greatness by ourselves, right? We usually, people say all the time, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and I'm a beneficiary of very, very generous mentors. I can agree with both of those things, but I also acknowledged earlier in our conversation that I am more introverted leaning, and so I'm very grateful to one of my first mentors, who was strongly involved and invested in the American College of Healthcare Executives. He was the regent for Nebraska and gave me my first executive opportunity in my career and really nudged me to invest in becoming connected and serving as a leader in my local chapter and then on national committees for the organization. And that evidence of his example of prioritizing relationships, prioritizing service to one's profession laid a foundation for me to be just consistently invested in networking, even as an introvert. And it's one of the things that I talk about and teach about very consistently is just that importance of networking. And I draw deeply from Susan Cain's research and my own personal lived experience around being an introvert and how even regardless of your social tendencies or temperament, if you're the most gregarious and social of butterflies and extroverts, great. Do networking in a way that is authentic to and effective for you. But if you're a little bit more introverted leaning, you can still be terrifically effective at building meaningful relationships and connections and having community or relationship with centers of influence or individuals who can be mentors and potentially occasionally activate as sponsors or champions and allies to advance you in your career. And I just don't think that the power of networking can be overstated for individuals at every stage of their career. There's internal networking, which is some of the things I alluded to earlier, which is just kind of getting to know yourself and then helping your leader to know what you want more of and what you feel inclined toward and giving you the ability to kind of test drive that and prove for it, or asking for opportunities, or making sure that you're well connected such that people know what your short and mid and long-term goals are so that as they're seeing your progress and growth and capacity and performance prove itself, they can maybe endorse you or recommend you or open a door for you in the future. And being one of those well-networked individuals is one of the things that can contribute to you never having to kind of beat the streets of a job market, but then you're having people that are reaching out to you, whether it's colleagues or individuals in your network or recruiters who are like, hey, I know you have a very unique and specific set of skills, Liam Neeson. would you like to join my team? And so that's a topic that I think is incredibly important. And if individuals are thinking, what else should I be doing if we already haven't given them an overwhelming recipe of necessary ingredients for their career journey, I would toss networking and relationship building into the mix as well.
I was just having a conversation with one of my athletes the other weekend about how he was talking about an organization that he's worked for, the Drake Relays, and this I consider it a mentor for him. Said that, yeah, if you ever, or just reach out whenever you need something, or if you want help with anything, whatever the case is, find a job, help back in the following year. And I think this is a deficit for so many people, actually picking up that phone and pulling and like doing that, right? And reaching out to those individuals who are offering their time and like their service. And I think I would just add that little part to everything you just said there is, don't be afraid when you get that to make a mental note, make an actual note, and set a time to do that, because that's important. Follow up with that.
100%. And I can't, agree with that more enthusiastically, because the number of people who genuinely do want to give of their time um, is is phenomenal. And that is the way that we learn and grow, and we gain, wisdom from others' lived experiences, and we get the insight, and then they get the line of sight to us such that they can serve other great connections or introductions to us, and propagate our network for us. But then also, um, the number of people who don't ever follow through on that is probably 80-20. I mean, probably, 1 or 2 in 10 ever do pick up the phone and take generous people up on their offer. And I believe deeply that one of the biggest barriers for any of us between that is, when that person says that to us, we're like, wow, that's awesome. But then in our mind, we start saying, but they're so busy, they're so important. But they have also said, call me, door is open, I'll take you to coffee, I'll take you to lunch. And if we let that pass, shame on us, right? And the majority of people, I can say this from my deep belief and experience, like, do I have a lot of other things demanding my time? Sure. But do I always find myself restored and rejuvenated after mentoring conversations? No doubt. And there's a Walt Whitman quote that says, the gift goes to the giver. And mentorship is an output, it's a task, but it is paradoxical in the way that it's restorative to most professionals. And so if and when there are individuals who are kind of luminaries or big deals, or even if they're just a step ahead of you and they offer that, do not pass. And then just let that become a practice that's a muscle that you grow. And then it just becomes so comfortable to you that you don't not do it.
This has been awesome.
This was, yeah, these are great conversations. This is so fun. I know that's kind of the question I led with was, are you having fun? I am. I'm sitting here having this conversation. So thank you for coming, and thank you for sitting down with us. We appreciate it so much. It's awesome.
It's my pleasure. And I just thank you for this important work. I love the good content that you're putting out into the world, and the reason that you're doing it is amazing. So carry on and keep it up. And thank you for your leadership.